How's it everyone? This is Lolcohol. In today's video, I'm going to be going over some of the things that I don't really like about Path of Exile. I've been absolutely loving the game. This is not a hate video. It's more of like a feedback on things I think could be better for the game. Overall, I think the game is phenomenal. The foundation of the game is there. It's really, really excellent. I've been having fun like 99% of the time, but there are some issues that I think could be addressed, small things that could be fixed to make the game a lot better. But just to start off with some of the things that I think are really good, because we don't want it to just be pure hate. Firstly, the boss design is phenomenal. A lot of the fights, they remind me of Souls games, but not in terms of like the difficulty and like having perfect timing, but just the design and the skills and dodging out the way and being rewarded when you do the right thing at the right time. That feels great. The combat and the combo system feels really good. When you get a good combo and it pays off, it's very satisfying. Also, the story, amazing. Visuals, like not just the graphics. The graphics are great, but the design, like the actual art direction is incredible. Also, sound, music, 10 out of 10, brilliant. I think the arenas, like the actual areas throughout the game, the way they change the way you engage enemies, brilliant. WASD, love it. And overall, just like the foundation of the game, like I said, is so good that I think for people who don't like it, there are small things that need to happen that will make you love it as much as people who already do. But going into things that I think could be tweaked, and starting off, I think is to do with the passive tree. Most of the tree, there are some really interesting things, but there are some strange things. And one of the big things is sort of this pro-con on notables. So things like this, heavy ammunition. The top thing is reduced attack speed, and then increased projectile stun buildup. I don't really like this. I like the upside downside idea when it comes to keystones and uniques, because often those downsides are things that you can work around. It'll be like a big downside, like chaos inoculation over here, max life is 1, immune to chaos damage. Makes you think, okay, this is a huge downside, but it informs you into, okay, I can build around this, get the full benefit and mitigate that downside. Whereas something like this is just reduce attack speed. Unless I'm missing something, that's just bad. And it's overall like, why not just, instead of having the reduced attack speed, reduce the projectile damage, projectile stun buildup. There's also some other things on the tree that are just so low, like 6% increase attack speed, 3%, but you have to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you get like 6% increased attack speed. This just isn't appealing right off the bat. Also, things like this, like 0.75. Maybe if you're stacking enough of these, it's going to feel good. But there's a lot of things on the tree that just aren't appealing enough. And especially the downside on notables. I really don't feel like that's the place to have downsides. Keep the downsides for uniques. Keep them for keystones. Have them as heavy downsides, but have them as things that you can work around, whereas not just damage reduction. This just feels weird. It might be good, but I don't like it. Next, and probably the most obvious thing, is just the amount of currency that's dropping is not there. It's really, really, this is me in Act 5, and I probably had like 10, maybe 10 Regal Orbs. This is a massive choke point on crafting. And then there is another massive choke point on that, which is Exalted Orbs. So currently what happens is you might find a base and then you just use a transmutation. Maybe you get a good mod. Cool. If you do, then you use an augment. Maybe you get another good mod. Most of the time, however, what happens is you get a bad mod. Okay, sell it to a vendor. Maybe you get a good mod, augment it, probably get a bad mod. At that point, you're kind of in this weird situation where you're like, man, I have so few Regal Orbs. is it worth it for me to use one of them to maybe get a second good mod? And almost always the answer is no. Rather, I'm just going to keep hoping with a transmutation and an augment until I get 2 good mods and then regal. And then you end up in a situation, let's say you have 2 good mods, you regal it, you get a bad mod, and now you're like, my Exalted Orb, is it worth it to use it on this item? A lot of the time you end up feeling like, not really. There's not enough. So there's just this kind of like stranglehold on your gear and progression. And I think that's leading a lot of people to feel like they're kind of at the mercy of RNG. If you do get a decent item or even a good item from a vendor or a drop, your experience is going to change dramatically. Versus if you get unlucky, you might just feel like you're screwed and not really know what to do. So, I mean, I'm using this armor from like level 10, this helmet. I'm, again, Act 5. I have a lot of blue items, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but this is really bad. It's like a level 14 belt, and I just cannot get anything better than this. This kind of leads me into my next point, which is the lack of Orbs of Alteration. Now, initially, my understanding and feeling was, all right, I kind of understand why alterations aren't in the game. You want to make ground loot matter more. You want to make bases matter more. However, I think it's actually had the opposite effect, where alterations not being in the game has made some bases matter less. Let's say, for example, I find this crossbow, right? Just imagine it's a white base with 2 sockets and 10% quality. That's really exciting. However, if I use a transmute on that and I get a bad mod and then I aug it and even if I get a decent mod, at that point, am I really going to want to use one of my 2 regal orbs? I might. And then if I hit a 3rd bad mod, am I going to want to now fully commit with Exalted Orbs and gambling with it? That doesn't feel good. I think having alterations back, even though it does possibly lead to some spammy behavior where you're sitting there spam, which is pretty lame, but it could bring back some of the importance of a base like this, where you can at least say, look, okay, I only have 2 regals, but at least I have control over the first 2 mods of my item before I commit and make that next step with my regal orbs. Try and at least get 2 mods that are good, and then I think at that point you can say, okay, well, if I can slam it a couple of times, I might get another 4 good mods, and then it would be worth it. But yeah, a lot of my gear, even rares, you can see these are things I've regaled, and then I'm like, well, I don't have exalts. Like, I cannot keep going on this. Other than the loot, Orbs of Alchemy, why are these so rare? These should be way more common. A lot of these issues with loot, I think, can just be solved by improving drop rates of alchemies and regals and exalts. That would make things feel so much better. In terms of the loot drops, I think loot just overall feels a little bit too scarce, maybe a little bit too scarce. Sometimes you will fight a rare monster with like Molten Shell. He takes ages to kill and he will drop like 14 gold. And you think, well, that was kind of a waste of time. You never really want people to have that feeling of their time being, not that the time being wasted, but when you see that super strong monster, you kind of think, okay, if I engage this and fight it, maybe it's going to drop a unique. But I think the pattern that a lot of people have been seeing is, if I fight this Anki monster, it maybe, if I'm lucky, going to drop like a magic item. So not necessarily needing guaranteed loot, but an improvement, certainly, especially with those tankier mods. Then, rare chests. Why did the rare chest drop 14 gold and the white chest dropped a unique item and the blue chest dropped 3 gold? I don't understand the chests. It was really cool when I first saw that and I thought, oh wow, a rare chest. Like, I want to check that out. But it doesn't seem to actually matter. So having rare chests and things in the world that you see and you're excited and you're like, oh wow, okay, that is going to drop me a rare item. That's something really cool. So if you're gonna have rare chests, maybe have it guarantee a rare item, or maybe you find a unique chest and it guarantees a unique item. Yeah, loot overall, I think, is the main make or break. But like I said, there are so many things you can do to fix it. Also, another problem with loot is just vendor prices they feel way too high. Way too high. Same with gambling. You can play for like an hour and then gamble, I don't know, 3 crossbows and they're all blue and great. I have to play another couple of hours to maybe get an upgrade. That does not feel great. These prices are too high. Also, not finding enough rare items means you're not getting enough regal orbs. Also, respecking is way too expensive. How much does it cost? So I have 7,900 gold. It costs like almost 2,000 to respec a single point. Yeah, what happened to me earlier today was I thought, oh man, let's try out this weapon master thing, because I had an idea where I thought, okay, I can have my grenade set up and then I can have my shooty set up. And then I allocated this. And in order to use this, I needed to respec like 30 points on my tree to get any use out of this Ascendancy. And so I went to the hooded one and I could afford 1 respec. And I immediately went, instead of saving up for those 30 respec points, what I did instead was I respec these 2 points. So respec costs way too high. Look at this, like 9,000 gold for 1. I get it. You don't want people to be able to change super frequently, but it's like a little bit too much. And there's just too many things you can do with the loot you find. So you either feel starved on gold or you feel starved on currency, because you can either salvage something or you can disenchant it or you can sell it for gold. What might be nice is have it so that if you disenchant, you get a bit of gold back and get more shards so that you get more stuff back. If you want to think about it in terms of lore, you could say like I disenchanted this rare item. The vendor got 10 shards, but they only gave me 2 and 500 gold for the other 8 shards. So it just feels like there's too many things with the tiny amount of loot you do get. There's too much you are supposed to do with it that you end up feeling like starved on one resource or another, but not in a fun way where it's like, oh, I have to make decisions. It's more like I can't do what I need to do. And that kind of ties into the next thing about difficulty. I don't think this game is too difficult. I think all of the boss fights are phenomenally designed. Like the difficulty is right. The level of challenge is right. The problem is that you might know which tools you need to win a fight. However, you might not be able to get those tools because you're a bit currency starved or loot starved, or you gamble and you don't get lucky, or the vendor doesn't sell you something good. So it's like the problem is there and the solution is just really quite hard to get to. I remember the Act 2 boss. I was really struggling with him. I knew exactly what I needed. I needed to get like maybe some life gain on hit and some lightning resistance. And I did manage to get that by repeating the previous zone a couple of times. But it was, I think that's the kind of thing some people might feel very frustrated with, especially if your weapon is really bad. If your weapon is bad and you're not dealing enough damage and you're not getting currency and the vendors aren't selling it, it's just, there's too many points of that. So you need to be able to provide problems, but then also give people the access to have solutions to those problems. Then, not being able to take runes out, I don't like that. I think it would be much better if there was either a resource that you could take a rune out, or just being able to right click and take it out and exchange it. That makes you much more flexible with your gear. It makes you possibly more attached to a piece of gear in some way. Maybe even if you have to use an orb that deletes the rune that's in there to take it out, sort of like Diablo 2, you use your Hell rune and your Scroll of Town portal in the Herodric Cube, and then it gets deleted. Something just to take it out. So you have that flexibility with your gear. As for the Ascendancy, I actually didn't hate it. I had fun with them, but when I was doing it, I could see the problems with it. Having RNG tied to something as impactful as your Ascendancy is really bad. So the Ultimatum one, I failed, I think, the first 2, but it was just because of the mods I was given. Some of those mods that you get in Ultimatum are just way too hard, way too punishing, and they kind of, like, if you're on the 4th wave and you get something that's just way too hard, it bricks it, and you might have to do it over again. So Having that RNG element in that sort of process, I don't think is good. Same with the Sanctum. Having the honor system just is brutal for melee builds. It's just like the rooms you get, the afflictions you get, there's so much RNG involved that you could just get unlucky and fail it because of unluckiness. So challenge when you feel like you can overcome it with tools and with skill and knowledge is great. I love that kind of challenge. Challenge where you feel like something is out of your control and you just got unlucky and that's why you failed. That's when people start tilting. I tilted yesterday because of that, because of ping and also some weird input delay. That's the kind of thing that is tilting. Give people the control, let them be able to decide their fate, at least with important things like that. Maybe later on have the endgame Sanctum with the honor system. As for the rest, I think some skills just feel really, really bad and need to be buffed. There were some skills like on this class that just felt so gross. Like the reload times were like 3 seconds long where you just, putting in the bolt, shooting the arrow. It took forever. And the more and more I look around, it looks like most people playing Mercenary they've diverged onto the same build. And I don't know if that's just because this is the kind of really best setup or the one that really felt the best, or just because a lot of the other skills felt bad to use. So I think it was the high velocity rounds early on felt super yucky to reload. I'm sure there are ways to make these work, but a lot of the skills just didn't feel great to use, and it would be nice to see more of those skills buffed. Some skills do need to be nerfed. I was using gas grenade before it was nerfed, and I actually hated it because of how strong it was. It ruined boss fights. It made them go way too quickly. It ruined the fun of them. I feel like it's in a good spot now, but it would be nice to see some of these other skills brought up to that level. So it didn't feel like everyone was like, oh, grenade builds, that's the good thing, right? Although at the same time, I think some of us might be overlooking a lot of things. It's like, day 2? Friend Anti-Swipe, he showed us a crossbow shooty build with Mercenary that looks awesome. So I think there is a lot out there, but it's just strange that so many people have ended up doing almost the exact same build unintentionally. And then overall, I think Act 2, the progression felt really weird. Act 1 had a really nice progression where you're finding items, you're getting new gems, you're getting new support gems, maybe find a nice rare item, but there's these like passive boosts of power that happen regardless on whether or not you find a piece of gear. So it doesn't matter if you get lucky, you might get a support gem that buffs your character or a spirit gem that buffs your character. There's all these nice little boosts. And then there's this weird progression void that happens in Act 2 where you're not getting really any new gems. None of the new supports you're getting are special. They're all like the same tier ones that you were getting before. And you're not finding any gear upgrades and the monsters aren't dropping loot. And it just leads to this weird feeling where like Act 2, there's a dip in progression. And then that picks up again at the start of Act 3 when you start finding like the higher tier support gems. So you get this wealth of new supports that you can use. Also maybe get lucky enough to find things like Jeweler's Orbs. There's that other boost of power. So overall, I think game is like 9.8 out of 10. But all these little things, it just feels like it's number tweaks that need to happen to make it feel really excellent. I don't want the game to be easy. I don't want it to be easy. I want it to feel challenging, but I don't want people to feel like they are at the mercy of RNG, where it's like, I'm not getting alchemy orbs. I'm not getting bases. The vendors aren't selling me anything good. I'm gambling and not getting anything good. I'm not finding any good rares at the vendor, etc., etc. You get the idea. But overall, I love the game. I will have a guide out for this build probably tomorrow morning. And yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know all the things you love about this game, because I do love it. This seemed like a doomer video, but I love it. I'm having a great time. Brilliant game. I just want it to be even more brillianter. Anyway, If you want to support the channel, I have a Patreon. You can become a YouTube member. Give me a follow on Twitch. Subscribe, like, all of that stuff. Have a wonderful day. Catch you in the next video, and bye-bye.